revival created America. That's a bold statement, but let me point out the facts and then you can decide for yourself. Joseph Galloway, former Speaker of the Pennsylvania Assembly and a close friend of Benjamin Franklin, said that the Revolution was a religious quarrel caused by the Presbyterian and Congregationalists. Let's go back a little further and explain. In the 1740s, America didn't look much different than it might today, at least morally speaking. That's when the country experienced a great spiritual awakening. Listen to this account from Jonathan Edwards and see how similar it might sound to where much of our country is today. This is from 1743. Quote, "Just after my grandfather's death, it seemed to be a time of extraordinary dullness in religion. Licentiousness for some years greatly prevailed among the youth of the town. They were many of them very much addicted to night walking and frequently the tavern, and lewd practices wherein some, by their example, exceedingly corrupted others." Later in this quote, he talks about how families have failed. That's a recount of the moral decline of the country. Then a spiritual revival hit, and here's the result. Quote, "But in 2 or 3 years after, there began to be a sensible amendment of these evils. The young people by degrees left off their frolicking and grew observably more decent in their attendance on the public worship. And there were more that manifested a religious concern than there used to be. But a sermon was now preached on the Sabbath before the lecture to show the evil tendency of the practice and to persuade them to reform it. The young people declared themselves convinced by what they had heard from the pulpit and were willing of themselves to comply with the counsel that had been given, and it was immediately, and I suppose almost universally, complied with. And there was a thorough reformation of these disorders thenceforward, which has continued ever since. A great and earnest concern about the great things of religion and the eternal world became universal in all parts of the town and among persons of all ages. All other talk but about spiritual and eternal things was soon thrown by. The minds of people were wonderfully taken off from the world. It was treated amongst us as a thing of very little consequence. The concerns and conversations of the people turned away from the things of the world and were replaced with conversations about spiritual and eternal things. This revival changed America, especially in the young who grew up and 30 years later declared independence. As Benjamin Franklin's friend said, the Revolution was largely a religious quarrel. Once the colonies experienced spiritual freedom, they no longer wanted to report to a tyrannical king. Their spiritual freedom opened their eyes to liberty, because the Scripture tells us that where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty.